Hey, what's up? This is Dan from Bodybuilder in Thailand.com. Let's talk about man boobs, bitch tits, and the drugs that bodybuilders use to prevent them from getting them and to shrink them or eliminate them. So, bodybuilders get gynecomastia, which is bitch tits, you know, when you get a female looking growth under the nipple or a lump, painful lump sometimes under the nipple. They get that because of steroid use and testosterone use. So testosterone in your body, it converts to estrogen. A percentage of testosterone converts to estrogen because there's an aromatase enzyme that your fat cells produce. And this aromatase enzyme, it converts testosterone molecule to estrogen molecule. And so that's why a lot of times during puberty too, guys will get gyno, and then they'll say, oh yeah, like I've had gyno since puberty. It's because you're producing like large amounts of hormones during that time, and they may have had some extra aromatase enzyme floating around in their blood, especially if they're overweight, because fat cells produce the aromatase enzyme, and then they'll have a lot of that testosterone converting over to estrogen. And obviously during puberty you're very sensitive to hormones, and so they'll get a growth under their nipples, get a lump under their nipple, something like that. So let's talk about the drugs that bodybuilders use, because bodybuilders also have high levels of testosterone all the time, and so if they didn't use these drugs, then they would have bitch tits. So the first one we're going to talk about is called Aromatase Inhibitor. So remember I talked about that aromatase enzyme. The aromatase enzyme is the enzyme that makes testosterone turn into estrogen. So an aromatase inhibitor, what it does is it attaches, it's a molecule, a chemical, that attaches to the aromatase enzyme and prevents it from attaching to the testosterone molecule. So the testosterone molecule isn't able to be turned into estrogen anymore. And the only way that men can produce estrogen is by having the testosterone molecule transformed into the estrogen molecule. So if you block that aromatase enzyme, you block your body's ability to produce estrogen. Okay, so the nipples and the lumps that can grow underneath them, they are dependent on estrogen to survive. So if they're estrogen dependent tissue, the tissue that may grow underneath them, bitch tits or whatever, if you already have it. So, I mean, if you use an aromatase inhibitor, you at least those lumps will shrink, because that tissue cannot survive without estrogen. And so there may be some hard cystic or fibrotic tissue under there that cannot be shrunk away and leaving, but it will at least get smaller if somebody that has gyno takes an aromatase inhibitor, because then it will deprive that tissue of estrogen, which will make your body start breaking that down. Also, the fat in the area around the chest is also more sensitive to estrogen. And so if you'll notice, like female typical body fat deposits would be, you know, on the butt, on the thighs, on the chest. So those are areas that are, the estrogen receptors there are extra sensitive to estrogen, and that makes fat deposits in those areas more likely. So if somebody is using an aromatase inhibitor, when a bodybuilder uses an aromatase inhibitor, it's common for those estrogen dependent areas to become leaner and to have a emphasis, if they're on a diet, of losing fat in those areas, because those areas are no longer being stimulated by estrogen and caused to uptake more fat than usual. They're caused to release their fatty acids into the bloodstream and shrink. So aromatase inhibitors, there are three main ones that bodybuilders use. Arimidex is one. Arimidex usually comes in 1 milligram tablets. These are all pharmaceutical drugs, by the way. This is educational entertainment purposes only. Don't do anything talked about in this video. Don't do anything I've done. And yeah, consult a lawyer or a doctor or whatever before you do any of this kind of stuff. So I've used all the drugs that I'm going to talk about in this video. I don't have gyno at all, actually. I have very small dime-sized nipples, but I've used plenty of anabolic steroids and have never had gyno issues. I've had some times where my nipples have gotten itchy or they've maybe gotten a bit swollen, but then I've used the drugs that I'm going to talk about to shrink them back down very quickly or make them not be itchy and swollen anymore, and never developed any tissue like gyno, so I don't have lumps under my nipples. So Arimidex, aromatase inhibitor, it usually comes in 1 milligram tablets, and typically a bodybuilder's dosage would be around 1 milligram 3 times a week, and they would do this when they're taking a testosterone cycle in order to make it so that the testosterone did not convert to estrogen during their cycle, and then they wouldn't get water retention, they wouldn't get bloat, they wouldn't get sensitive, itchy, or swollen nipples, they wouldn't get gyno because of taking Arimidex. Arimidex is the weakest of the 3 aromatase inhibitors. There's Arimidex, there's Aromasin, and there's Letrozole. So Aromasin is the middle, it's the middle potency one. It usually comes in a 25 milligram tablet, and it's stronger than Arimidex, but it's not as strong as Letrozole. And Aromasin is unique because it's a suicidal aromatase inhibitor, whereas the other ones are just normal aromatase inhibitors. The difference between this is that the suicidal aromatase inhibitor, Aromasin, it actually, instead of attaching to the aromatase enzyme, the enzyme that makes the testosterone turn into estrogen, instead of just attaching to it like Arimidex and Letrozole does, Aromasin actually destroys it. So it doesn't just attach and then block it from attaching to testosterone. Aromasin actually kills the aromatase enzyme. So then your body does not have the ability to produce estrogen anymore until it can regenerate the aromatase enzyme again. So it is also probably the best, like, as far as feel-wise. I definitely, when I've been using Aromasin, I feel the best. I don't feel like there's any side effect really, but on Aromasin or on Arimidex or Letrozole, I can kind of feel maybe a little bit heavier or maybe a little bit of a rundown feeling sometimes. I would definitely just say from personal experience that Aromasin seems to be the least toxic of the aromatase inhibitors, and it seems to be just the cleanest. It feels the cleanest, that's for sure. And it works very effectively. Yeah, generally people will take 12.5 to 25 milligrams 3 times per week with their steroid cycle or their testosterone cycle or whatever. And these kind of dosages that people would take during their cycles, this would be a common dosage that someone would also take, that a bodybuilder would take when they weren't on cycle. And that would really be the time that they would be trying to shrink down gyno that they had, or get rid of gyno. If it wasn't really set in and severe, then they could get rid of it probably, or at least be able to shrink it. And so normally they'd be doing this when they weren't on steroid cycle. And as far as taking the aromatase inhibitors, they'd be taking about the same dosage that they'd be taking on cycle. But if you take that when you're off cycle, there's much less testosterone, and it will really just, you know, crush those estrogen levels down. And without those estrogen levels, the breast tissue that has developed will not be able to survive, and it'll shrink down or go away completely. So my preference is Aromasin, but then there's also Letrozole. Letrozole is the strongest. It comes in 2.5 milligram tablets usually, and Letrozole really like just annihilates estrogen. It's so effective at blocking it. Normally people take like 2.5 milligrams twice per week, like Monday, Thursday, 2.5 milligrams, but that's still going to be a really strong dose. You could even take half a tablet, which would be 1.25 milligrams twice a week. But so Letrozole is very strong, and when I've taken too much Letrozole before, what's ended up happening is I feel like my estrogen's crashed, and there's a certain part of your brain that it needs estrogen to function correctly. And so for a few days, while my body would be regenerating more estrogen again, because I have absolute zero estrogen from taking the Letrozole, I would feel very run down, like just needed to sleep a lot or nap. And so that was a side effect of taking too much Letrozole. It's by far the strongest. It's also the most likely to give you side effects. And yeah, I mean, for the worst, most severe cases of gyno, and people are trying to shrink it or get rid of it, generally Letrozole is the recommended thing to do. but it's probably better to use Aromatase if you can. Again, this is not advice, it's just based on my experiences and experiences of friends and people I've talked to. Okay, so that's aromatase inhibitors. Finished with that. Now we're going to go on to SERMs. So SERMs are the other way that you can really attack the estrogen molecule. SERM stands for Selective Estrogen Receptor Modulator. It's similar to the SARMs, which are Selective Androgen Receptor Modulators. So SARMs are like a new class of drug that build muscle, and SERMs, they block estrogen, and they block estrogen in selective tissue. So the SERM, it blocks the estrogen behind the nipple specifically. It's selective for that tissue. So basically what it does is it attaches to the estrogen receptor. The estrogen receptor in your breast tissue, in your nipple tissue, whatever, and it specifically blocks that receptor from receiving input from any estrogen molecules that are floating around in your blood. So SERMs like Nolvadex, people will often take 20 milligrams a day of that to block estrogen or get rid of gyno. It's very, very effective, Nolvadex, for shrinking down gyno. Especially, yeah, for shrinking it, for getting rid of it, because it goes right to the nipple, because that's like what it is designed to do, is to attach to those receptors in the nipple and get rid of gyno. So Nolvadex, very effective. A combination of Nolvadex 20 milligrams per day and Exemestane and Aromatase. So Aromatase 25 milligrams 3 times per week and Nolvadex 20 milligrams per day would be a common protocol that a bodybuilder would use to shrink or get rid of gyno. And there's also other SERMs like Raloxifene is supposed to be quite a bit stronger than Nolvadex, but I've taken Raloxifene 60 milligrams a day, and it's also a SERM, and I mean it was probably stronger, but it was negligible. And Nolvadex is pretty much the thing that everybody's been using, all the bodybuilders have been using since the 70s. So that's the general way to do things. And then as far as, there's one other type of gyno, if those things will not budget, there's another type of gyno called progesterone or prolactin-induced gyno, and people, bodybuilders will use pramipexole or they'll use cabergoline, which are dopamine agonists, to combat those types of gyno. And usually from taking things like trenbolone. Trenbolone is arguably the most powerful steroid, and it really elevates the hormone prolactin in your body, which is a hormone that can produce growth of breast tissue, and women produce it a lot during pregnancy. And this type of gyno is not going to be able to be gotten rid of or really budged by an aromatase inhibitor. So like Aromatase won't really do shit to it, and neither will a SERM like Nolvadex. It's actually, you got to get the prolactin level down. And so what a bodybuilder will use when they're using trenbolone or DACA, those kind of steroids that elevate prolactin or progesterone, is they use a dopamine agonist to bring those levels of prolactin down. They'll use cabergoline, generally like 0.5 milligram 2 or 3 times a week, or they'll use pramipexole, same thing, but they'll use about generally 0.5 milligram every day of pramipexole, although that can make you really sick if you don't build up to that dose from like 0.1 milligram, 0.2 milligram, 0.3 milligram, 0.4 milligram, tapering up every day. It can make you really sick to take pramipexole. Generally, I think cabergoline is more well tolerated by the body, so people will take cabergoline, and that really just smashes the prolactin, and it also increases your sex drive, which is a funny side effect. But yeah, then that'll make that can be the way to get rid of the gyno if the Nolvadex or the Aromatase isn't doing its job, isn't getting rid of it. You may have prolactin-induced gyno. That's what bodybuilders use to prevent gyno and trenbolone. All right, guys. So that's what bodybuilders use to prevent and get rid of gyno, get rid of bitch tits, get rid of man boobs. There's 3 different drugs. There's aromatase inhibitors like Aromatase that kill the estrogen producing enzyme there, and also kill the estrogen molecule. And then there are aromatase inhibitors like Arimidex or Letrozole that block the enzyme, Letrozole being the strongest aromatase inhibitor. And then there are serums that block the receptor, like that is targeted at the nipple, like Nolvadex. It blocks the estrogen receptors at the nipple so that estrogen cannot affect them, and then without estrogen, the tissue there is dependent on estrogen to survive, so it dies off. Or there is dopamine agonists like cabergoline, which reduce prolactin if you have prolactin-induced gyno. Alright guys, so this has been Dan from bodybuilderinthailand.com. Visit bodybuilderinthailand.com to learn the truth in bodybuilding, just raw information, no holds barred, just telling it like it is, telling what bodybuilders do. Alright?